Hi everyone, this is Dr. John Demartini. My vignette today is how to break the fantasy of living in a one-sided world. You may not think you're doing it, but there's a probability that some part of you is. So I'd like to address that. First, let me explain what that means. If you're looking for happiness without sadness, you're looking for health without disease, you're looking for harmony and cooperation and peace without disharmony and conflict and war, you're looking for a heaven without a hell, then you're living in the lowest level of our animal brain, the amygdala. You're looking for a dopamine fix. And people who do that, which is a lot of people, some people call the masses, then you're vulnerable and you're basically going to be sold the fantasy. The fantasy, by definition, is a pleasure without a pain, a happy without a sad, a positive without a negative. Imagine a magnet, and you hold the magnet and you try to chop it in half and get to one side. If you're ignorant, you'll think you can get it. If you're wise and you understand Maxwell's equations, you know you can't get a positive without a negative. A magnet has a wholeness of both. But if you're striving for a one-sided world, by definition, we call it a fantasy. Its opposite is the nightmare. So the more you strive for a one-sided world, looking for the fantasy, the more your life becomes a nightmare. Because you're striving for that which is not available and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. In Buddhism, they used to say that the desire for that which is not available and the desire to avoid that which is not avoidable is the source of human suffering. And that's why there's a whole lot of medication for depression today, because people keep looking for fantasies and keep being vulnerable by their dopamine fix, their amygdala. They're looking for this pleasure reward. And in the process of doing it, there's healthcare systems that are selling the fantasy. There are psychological systems that are selling the fantasy. There are sociological, political people that sell the fantasy. And there's theological priests and ministers and all kinds of people in religion that's selling the fantasy. They're the four opiates for the masses. The desire for a one-sided world. Now, you're not going to have fulfillment searching for a one-sided world. When you live by your highest values, you embrace pleasure and pain, the peace and war, the support and the challenge, the health and disease. You embrace both sides of life for a purpose. When you're living by your highest values, you embrace support and challenge equally. But when you're living in your animal nature, your lower values, off you go towards a one-sided world. And because of it, there's plenty of people to sell it to. You never have to worry about it. Imagine this. Imagine you're sitting there, and you've probably heard of a gentleman named Warren Buffett. He's one of the largest financiers and wealth persons in the world. And what's interesting is, if you were to put him in a chair and had somebody come into him and say to you, I've got this investment that has all upsides, no downsides. You can't lose, you can only win. It's going to make a fortune immediately overnight without any risk. He'd get up, smile, probably walk out and think this is ridiculous. This has no basis in any facts or truth. Because he's a smart man, he understands that there's risk and reward and there's probabilities, and he understands the pair of opposites. But if you took somebody that is very ignorant, that is maybe not knowing anything about money and vulnerable and basically wounded by all the frustrations because they don't know how to manage it, and looking for a quick fix and looking for a gambling system. The gambling casinos make money off people that are poor. Think about it. And if you look, they would sit there and say, here's a guaranteed win, no loss, absolutely. They'd probably go and leverage their house to go buy that thing out of foolishness because the dopamine runs them and they're wanting a quick fix. This is foolishness. There's a difference between wisdom, which is embracing objectively, reasonably, both sides of life, and the folly and the foolishness of the animal behavior, the dopamine fix. I always say the truth has never been in the hands of the masses. It's always in the hearts of the masters. If you want to be a master, you have to live by your highest values, wake up your executive center that has reason and has foresight and embraces both sides of life objectively, or otherwise you'll be vulnerable to the animal behavior. And you'll be sold the opium of the masses, and you'll be driven to go buy that. And you'll be searching for that which is unavailable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. Anytime you get addicted to a fantasy, you create a nightmare out of your life. Depression is a comparison of your current reality to a fantasy you keep being addicted to. And the dopamine is the addictor. So anytime somebody sells you something that makes you a dope and activates your dopamine, you're vulnerable. So if you want to transcend the one-sided world, you have to stop and start organizing your life according to priority and live by your highest values. You need to stop and look for the downsides, for the things that people are fantasizing, telling you. If a person selling you something can't tell you both sides of it, it's not real. In order to get real, you got to be able to see both sides. In your life, if you look carefully enough, you've had events in your life that you thought were terrible, and a day, a week, a month, a year, or 5 years later, you look back and said, thank God that occurred, it actually served you. And then you found things you thought were all terrific, and then a day, a week, a month, a year, or 5 years later, you found out there were some terribles in it. Nature forces you to get balanced. It tries to teach you both sides. In fact, if you look at your life, some of the challenge in your life is what made you grow, and some of the fantasies are actually what kept you juvenile. So if you want to transcend this dopamine fix, the opium of the masses, don't be vulnerable to the idea of being sold that you're going to have health without disease, because history has proven otherwise. All around you, the evidence is there. We have to really be ignorant to avoid seeing the obvious evidence. There's still conflict in the world. There's not peace without war. There's not happiness without sad. It's a billions of dollar business on depression. There's not health without disease. We got hospital systems that are giant. We got casinos that are giant. Almost, if you look carefully, in all the biggest organizations in the world, the theological organizations, the sociological political organizations, the healthcare systems selling those things, they're the largest organizations feeding the fantasy and taking advantage of the people who are not wise. If you want to be accountable and you want to be organized in your life, understand there's two sides. The magnificence of the way life truly is greater than any fantasy you'll ever impose on it. So if you want to ground yourself and embrace the two sides of life, you won't set fantasies and create nightmares. You'll be empowered, and you'll do something amazing with planet Earth. And that amazingness is transformation, not a positive without a negative. In your body, you have build and destroy. You have mitosis and apoptosis. You have reduction and oxidation. You have always a balance in life. In every ology, every discipline I've studied, that balance is showing up, except in 4 areas: healthcare systems, psychological systems, sociological systems, and theological systems. They are the ones that sell the opium of the masses. And if you want to be a master in your life, embrace both sides of life. If you want to be caught in the animal cage, searching for that which is not available, trying to avoid that which is not avoidable, allow your dopamine to run your life. Thank you for joining me for this presentation today. If you found value out of the presentation, please go below and please share your comments. We certainly appreciate that feedback. And be sure to subscribe and hit the notification icons. That way I can bring more content to you and share more to help you maximize your life. I look forward to our next presentation. Thank you so much for joining.